everyone, welcome to the May 28th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragon. I'll be joined in just a moment by my co-host Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we'll be doing some handicapping of Churchill Downs Saturday card. Plenty of stakes on tap for their Saturday evening card, and we're going to talk about the late pick 5 sequence that will take place in late afternoon. Actually, this is a day card for them. Races 7 through 11. This is an all stakes pick 5, including a couple of graded stakes, those being the Matt Winn for the 3-year-olds on the dirt and the Regret for the 3-year-old fillies on the turf. But there are 3 ungraded stakes as part of this sequence, including the Aristides for the sprinters later in the day. So we'll talk about all of them. Some favorites that might be worth trying to beat, some wide open races. So lots to look forward to at Churchill Downs on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this card. There's even a few stakes before this sequence. I think there's 7 stakes in a row, and those aren't too bad either. So ready to dive right in.
Yeah, and one of those favorites that some people might want to try to beat in this sequence is in the first leg, race 7. It's the Shawnee Stakes, going 1 1/16 miles for fillies and mares on the dirt. And that heavy favorite is going to be the number 7, En Voutante, a horse that, Craig, I know that you and I have never been the biggest fan of this one. She's run against some much better competition in her recent starts, and she clearly is getting class relief as she drops into this listed stakes race. Just kind of wonder if she's going to show up with her best performance, because it does seem like her best performance will probably beat this field.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm kind of glad this is the first leg in the pick 5, because there's a good chance I just skip it and move on to the pick 4. And she's 4 to 5 on the morning line. It's hard to see her getting drifting up or any higher than that. And while I agree, I don't particularly love her as some great horse. She's ran fine, but she ran on that, I think it was Oaks Day race, the La Troyenne. It came back as a slow race. She only got a 1:11 TimeformUS speed figure, even though she ran at what looked to be a good second behind She Dares the Devil. But even that said, that race is still fast enough to beat most of the others in here. So for me, it's really hard to get excited about anybody else. I mean, the second choice in here, Paris Lights, was in that same race and just ran absolutely horribly. So I couldn't gravitate to anyone else. I think she is by far the most likely winner. And if I did play the pick 5, I'd probably single her. But she's not going to offer any value. So I would probably just skip this one.
Yeah, I was looking really hard to try and find an alternative to En Voutante, because I haven't been thrilled with her races. I mean, she was 4th behind She Dares the Devil and Latruska 2 back in that Azeri. I didn't think she was any match for those horses in that race, even though she was only beaten 2 1/4 lengths. And last time, as you said, that La Troyenne, while it was a grade 1 race, it was a pretty slow grade 1, and I didn't think that She Dares the Devil came with her A effort to beat her. So I feel like if this race had come up with a legitimate rival, maybe En Voutante would have been vulnerable, but I just couldn't find anybody else that I really wanted to go to try and beat her. As you said, the second choice, Paris Lights, I looked at her for a long time. I mean, she was kind of wide around both turns in the La Troyenne, but still, she had no punch through the stretch. And I think there are some doubts about the race that she ran prior to that in the Distaff Handicap. I know that was a race that you had to break out from a speed figure standpoint because that Aqueduct track was changing so much that day. And that's one where a lot of horses have come back, or I should say the 2 horses that have come back out of there have significantly regressed from a speed figure standpoint. So I think we're still kind of waiting for some validation of that 1:17 TimeformUS speed figure that Paris Lights got. And beyond those 2, I just don't know where else you'd want to go. I mean, the one other horse that has prior form that might put her in the mix, the number 2, La Rinalita, who looked so promising when she made her U.S. debut at the beginning of 2020, winning off by nearly 10 lengths in an allowance race at Oaklawn. She seemed like the kind of horse at that time that might have stakes in her future, but obviously something went wrong and she was off for so long, and she was so dull in her return at Oaklawn last time. I mean, maybe Steve Asmussen gets her to turn around here, but I couldn't really latch on to her as the alternative, and the others just didn't do too much for me. So kind of like you, I would not single En Voutante at a pick 5. I would make her the only A, maybe use a couple others as C's and on some minor backup tickets, but En Voutante is where most of my play would go through.
Yeah, and the point you make about Paris Lights is good, and it's one that had me kind of scratching my head with En Voutante. Because as slow as that race came back, it's almost the opposite direction where it's a little fishy. Unfortunately, nobody else has run back from that race yet, such as racing in 2021 that a month later nobody's run again. But that's just the way it is. But I would suspect the horses that out of that race are going to come back and run faster. So that's why I'm having a tough time just finding an alternative to her.
Things do get a little more interesting from a wagering standpoint as we move on to the second leg of this pick 5 sequence, the 8th race at Churchill. That is the Grade 3 Regret, going 1 1/8 on the turf for the 3-year-old fillies. And Craig, I thought this race was pretty wide open. There's a slight favorite on the morning line, or actually a pretty decisive favorite on the morning line in the number 4, Spanish Love Affair, who's listed at 5-2. She has officially finished off the board in both of her starts so far in 2021, but that's because she was disqualified. Questionable disqualification when she was taken down in the Here Comes the Bride at the start of the year. If you can find the excuse for her last race in the Appalachian, and Mark Casse did offer one up. I saw in Marty McGee's article for this race that he said she came out of that Appalachian with an infection. So if that is the excuse, going back to the 5 prior races that Spanish Love Affair ran, she is the horse to beat in this spot, but there are plenty of other interesting alternatives.
Yeah, she's the horse to beat, I would say, mostly because if she's ridden aggressively and gets back to her old form, she's probably going to be clear on the lead, which is always a tough thing for the rest in the field. But I'm a little shaky on her. She's never run particularly fast. Her fastest figure came in Aunt Pearl's Breeders' Cup Juvenile, where she really wasn't a factor at any point in the race. She just kind of chased and got sucked along to that figure, in my opinion. So I'll use her just because of the pace advantage, but I'm going to spread in this race and use some others as well. The ones I'm going to consider, I think Barista is the horse that I'll lean to most, and I guess make my top pick just because she ran the best speed figure. I think she's coming out of the best race, that Grade 2 Edgewood that was won by a really good filly and Gift List. Granted, that one won easy and she was no threat to her, but I still thought it was a pretty solid effort. But I think there's others who are just as good. The 7 Gams Mission won a nice allowance race last time at Churchill, coming from off the pace. And the horse she beat that day, Flown, just to her outside, might have even ran a better race as she kind of got caught going wide. She saved ground on the turns. She was kind of inside, but she lost some momentum, I think, when she had to swing out, whereas the horse to her inside, Gams Mission, just kind of saved a lot more ground and was able to get through. But all of them, I think, will be coming late and could run fine.
Yeah, I don't have a big problem with Spanish Love Affair, and I totally hear what you're saying about the pace of this race. She could be the one that finds herself on the lead, even though this is not a pace projector that is predicting a situation favoring horses that are on the lead. She does look like one of the only horses with propensity to be forwardly placed, and a lot of the others are just deep closers, so it feels like a pace that's not going to be all that fast, and that might give Spanish Love Affair the real advantage. And if what Mark Casse said is true, and that supposed fungal infection that she had in the Appalachian is cleared up, then I suppose she does have the best form coming into this race. It just remains to be seen if some of the others are improving at the right time, because we can see these 3-year-old fillies take a big step forward around the spring of their sophomore years, and some of the horses that might be moving forward are those ones coming out of the Edgewood. I agree with you that the Edgewood featured the best horse in Gift List of any of the 3-year-old fillies we've seen on the turf so far this year. Obviously, the other major player in that race, Aunt Pearl, just didn't show up. The rest of that Edgewood field, aside from those 2 favorites, seemed a little bit hungry coming into the race, and a few of them did really get some speed figure boosts coming out of that, as Gift List kind of carried everybody along to a much faster figure. I wonder if we're going to see Barista run back to that number. I do agree that of the horses coming out of the Edgewood in this race, that Barista was clearly second best. I mean, she finished well clear of the rest of the field in second place, and I thought that Joel Rosario really didn't abuse her to get after the winner at the end of that. I mean, she was finishing pretty easily to secure that second place spot. I just feel like this is a deeper field than what she met in the Edgewood, where there was just that one standout horse, the only one who showed up. I am interested in the horses coming out of the allowance race that you were talking about, Craig, that was won by Gams Mission. And I completely agree with you that some of the closers in that race might have been a little bit more up against it from a trip standpoint. I actually think the one that might have gotten the toughest trip is the 3rd place finisher, Money for Roe, who had to go widest coming off the far turn and was closing decently at the end. That said, I'm going to go back to the winner of that race, Gams Mission, who has superior tactical speed to some of the others in here, and you can see her position on the pace projector in that second flight of runners. I think she might work out a really nice trip if Spanish Love Affair goes to the front. I expect her to be stalking in behind, and what I liked about that allowance win at Churchill last time was that when Flown came to her at the end of that race, you could see Gam's Mission almost digging in at the end, and if you watch the horses on the gallop out, Gam's Mission actually never let Flown get by and is kicking away from her at the end. She pricks her ears and then pins them back again and opens up about 3 lengths on the gallop out. And I don't like to make too much of gallop outs, especially with more experienced horses, but I like to see that when a horse has some real determination to win a race. And given that she's going out for the slightly more under the radar Cherie DeVoe barn, I think she's going to be a decent price in here. And I also just like her pedigree. You don't see too many of these lazy F ranch horses running anymore. And if you look at her pedigree, her second dam is Anti-Mame, a really nice multiple grade 1 winning turf horse for these connections going back to the mid 90s. So I just feel like Gam's Mission has some potential to take another step forward.
Yeah, as I said, I think she's fine in here. I may even also use the 9 Saranya just because the last time she chased Jouster in that Appalachian race, it just had a ridiculous pace. I'm not really sure that's how she wants to run. She's shown some versatility in her career, and she's a horse whose speed figures stack up with the rest of them. And I also think it would probably be silly to just dismiss Brad Cox. I don't want to miss out on this race because I left his horse out, who looks fine on paper. And I think if you put a line through that finish position last time with the excuse I mentioned, she fits with the rest of these also.
Yeah, I was a little disappointed in her Appalachian, but maybe what you said is true, that she's not comfortable being close to the pace, because I was hoping that she'd have more of a finish there, getting that trip up close to a dawdling pace. I thought that was a race where some of the closers were negatively affected, but maybe getting a trip from further back here will be to her benefit. But based on our discussion, I think you can kind of tell this is a race where I wouldn't just settle for Spanish Love Affair. I think there are definitely some other ways to go. And personally, I would lean on Gam's Mission, but I would also use plenty of others as backups. Moving on to the other graded stakes on this Churchill Downs Saturday card. That's the grade 3 Matt Winn, the middle leg of this pick 5 sequence going as race 9. This is at 1.16 on the dirt for the 3-year-olds. And we've got a couple of runners exiting the Kentucky Derby, one of which actually ran pretty well in that race in the number 3 Obesos, who seems like a deserving favorite in this Matt Winn after finishing a good 5th in the Kentucky Derby, only beaten by Medina Spirit, Mandaloon, Hot Rod Charlie, and Essential Quality, those 4 that were battling it out for the victory. And prior to that, Obesos had shown real quality at the fairgrounds. So I know he's listed as just the slight favorite on the morning line at 2-1, but to me, he's way the horse to beat in this race.
Yeah, I'd agree. I don't get these morning lines. I meant to mention it last time where we had a couple 5-1s and 9-2. Races just usually aren't bet like that. I would be surprised if it works out. And the same thing here where we have a 2-1, 2 5-2s. I think Obesos is going to be much more heavily bet than that. I wouldn't be surprised if he's more in the 7-5, 6-5 range. Because everybody saw that Kentucky Derby. I mean, he was the only horse really he wasn't gaining ground on the top 4, but he was clearly running better than the rest of them in here. He's got the best speed figures, so he is clearly the horse to beat. That said, I do have a little reservation in here because there's just not a whole lot of speed in here. The one thing that sticks out, though, is I don't think the horses shown up near the front on the pace projector are very good. Horses like Hello Hot Rod and Ready to Pounce. I'm certainly not going to bet on them, and I would be surprised if any of those top 3 morning line choices didn't win. But I don't want to get knocked out. I'm not going to single Obesos, but I'm not going to go crazy deep. But I'm going to use the 2 horses from the Derby. And if I have to make a top pick, I'll make it Helium just because I think he's got a little more tactical speed. He was up close to a pretty quick pace in the Derby. And while he did get tired, I think distance was always going to be a question with him. It was only his second race of the entire year, so I doubt he was really cranked up for the Derby, and I think he just might have a tactical advantage over the other 2. I'd also use Folsom. I don't particularly love him. I would never bet him to win. He hasn't run nearly as fast as the other 2. But again, I'm not going to get knocked out by a Brad Cox horse who's won against some pretty murky pace scenarios the last couple. Both races show big blue fractions. He came from off the pace and won pretty easily. So I don't want to hold his speed figures against him too much in that spot.
Yeah, I think if you have any concern about Obesos, it's rooted in the fact that this race might not feature that much pace, as you were saying. The pace projector is predicting a situation favoring horses on or near the lead, and Obesos is not going to be near the lead. He is a deep closer. I'm thinking that his class might just overcome that because I do prefer him of the two horses coming out of the Kentucky Derby. Helium ran fine in that race. He certainly ran better than I expected him to run. I gave him really no shot, and he did beat over half the field. I just think he's going to have to take another step forward to beat Obesos. And I mean, it's not like Helium is that fast in the early going himself. I mean, he'll be ahead of Obesos early, but I don't view him as having some major pace advantage in this race. So, I mean, I do think they're probably the two best horses in here because personally, I'm not a fan of Folsom. He started out his career as a turf horse. I know he won his last couple on the dirt, but one of those was an off-the-turf affair in the slump at Keeneland. I know the runner-up came back to win that race, to win next time, but we talked about that horse ethical judgment on the pace cast. I think that was a horse that significantly benefited from a rail bias in his subsequent start, so I'm not sure that allowance race is actually as strong as that run back might suggest, and personally, I didn't like that Oaklawn Stakes very much at all. I thought from top to bottom that was not a strong field, and Folsom just looked okay in victory. I know he overcame a moderate pace, but I mean, to me, he hasn't shown enough to suggest that he's in the same league as some of the horses that ran in the Kentucky Derby. So I am comfortable letting Folsom knock me out of pick 5. At a short price, I don't need that horse. The one other one that I would put into the mix is the number 1, Ready to Pounce, who I don't blame you for dismissing this horse, Craig, because he had everything go his own way when he broke his maiden at Keeneland last time. But if you watch that race, this horse is pretty impressive in victory. I mean, he dragged Brian Hernandez up into the race, coming around the far turn, and he won off from the runner-up Realm of Law really impressively. And I know Realm of Law is a horse that was entered for turf for Chad Brown, but he's one that was really highly regarded in the Chad Brown barn and had actually trained very well in the dirt. And I know Chad doesn't leave these horses in on the dirt unless he expects them to run decently. And I think both of these horses ran well. They were obviously clear of third place by 13 lengths. And that's a race when you look through the also rans that it's legitimately fast. And I wonder if he's going to appreciate extra ground here. I also wonder if maybe the rail was an advantage at Keeneland that day. Looking through the charts, it feels like maybe being inside was to the advantage of some horses, and Ready to Pounce was inside there. But this horse has ability, and he's got to take a step forward to get in the same league as the two coming out of the Derby. But I mean, among the rest, I prefer him to Folsom, so I would use him as the primary backup in a pick 5.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Folsom, I would only use as a C if I use him as all. Chances are he's going to be back positioned very closely to Obesos, and it's hard to think he could outkick him from there. But so I have no problem with that argument. I think Ready to Pounce came in. It was a race that was just full of turf horses, so maybe it looks better. But he did run pretty fast, and I'm never going to knock a 15-1 shot that somebody wants to use.
Moving ahead to the sprinters in the Aristides Stakes, going 6 furlongs on the dirt. Now, this is one where we've got a couple of horses exiting the Grade 1 Churchill Downs Stakes on the Derby Day undercard, one of which is listed as the favorite on the morning line in the number 10 Tap It to Win. I have to say, I'm not exactly sure how they're going to bet this race, but for a race that was listed as a Grade 1, I think we'd both agree the Churchill Downs Stakes was just not the strongest affair overall from top to bottom, and I don't want to give Tap It to Win too much credit for not showing up in a Grade 1 event when he's kind of developed a history of being a little bit all over the place. He's kind of random. Some days he runs a big figure, other days he's just totally uncompetitive, and I don't know if the class relief that he's getting here is actually that pronounced.
Yeah, I don't get it. I'm going to have to talk with our tech guy because we show a race rating for this race of 126. And that just seems like a mistake to me because there's no way it was. I mean, they're based on the speed figures the horses ran, and the best figure in the race is a 117, which came to the runner-up Lexitonian. So I'm with you. I don't buy that. That wasn't a Grade 1. Heck, it might not have been a Grade 3 the way it turned out speed-wise. So yeah, Tap It to Win. Yeah, he pressed a pretty quick pace, but he just did no running whatsoever when they turned for home. So I don't know that he'll be favored, and I don't particularly care for him in here. I do wonder about the pace projector. We show it as a field favor and horses on or near the early lead, but we do have the two horses coming from that race, the Churchill Downs Stakes, that dueled for the lead in pretty fast fractions. So I'm not sure what to make of the piece of the scenario in here. The one thing I am pretty sure of is that I think Empire of Gold is just the best horse. He's a horse who has high speed. He showed last time he could raid off it a little bit if he has to. He didn't run particularly fast, as he hasn't in either start this year, but in his third start off the layoff, this horse who led the Breeders' Cup a long, long way before getting tired late, and I just think he's the best horse, and I'm going to use him heavily in here as my A. There's one other horse I want to talk about, but I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Yeah, we agree about Empire of Gold. I think he is the most likely winner of this race, and he should be favored. And it just makes a lot of sense, not only because he's predicted to be on the front end in the pace projector, but also because, as you said, he showed his class, both in the Breeders' Cup last year and even in that Count Fleet off the layoff at Oaklawn Park. I don't think that Count Fleet was any worse from a quality standpoint than the Churchill Downs Stakes, even though that was a grade 3 and the other one's a grade 1. The Count Fleet might have actually had a stronger field with CZ Rocket and Whitmore in there. So I think he deserves credit for winning that race, and he validated that he's in good form last time, beating an overmatched field at Oaklawn. So I just think he makes a lot of sense. His rider's probably not going to play around. He's going to send him to the front end, and I think he's got a good chance to wire this field. I mean, his biggest competition might come from the number 3 Bango, the other horse who's coming out of the Churchill Downs Stakes, and if that Churchill Downs was a 6-furlong affair, Bango probably would have won because he had a clear lead coming by the 8th pole before the entire field descended on him, and it was a blanket finish across the wire, and Bango just kind of got tired in that last furlong. Kind of like Tap It to Win, though. He's a horse that's not totally reliable. Sometimes he shows up with a big effort, sometimes not. He has run well over this Churchill Downs course more often than not, so maybe it's just a horse for course kind of thing with Bango. I think he makes a fair amount of sense in here, but I do think he's going to get outrun to the lead by Empire of Gold, and I'm not sure that I like him as one that has to pass horses late. So I would use those two. I'm interested to know who the other horse that you like is, because I also have another horse that's a bigger price that I want to talk about. It's the number 2 Tough Love, who won an allowance race last time at Churchill in late April, and it's a replay that's worth going back and watching because this horse was getting a good trip coming to the top of the stretch when it seemed like Corey Lannery maybe overcommitted to the rail, and he was trying to make a move up inside of a tiring runner, got completely shut off, lost his momentum, had to swing to the outside, and it's rare to see horses overcome that kind of trouble and regain the momentum to win a race, but he was able to do that. That was against a weaker field, but he's run well against these, some familiar foes that are also in this race in the past. So he might just be a horse that's doing well right now. So I would use him as a long shot.
All right, well, you stole my thunder. That was the one. Just because what you said, 2 back, he had run a 110 speed figure. He's run consistently in that area. He only got a 102 last time, but it was clearly excusable, as you mentioned. So, and just the other note you mentioned about the Count Fleet being a stronger race. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious it was. If you go back 2 back, the horses who finished 1-2 in that race, CZ Rocket and Whitmore, actually finished ahead of Flagstaff in the race before that, which the name of which I'm forgetting, the Hot Springs, I believe it is. And he goes on to win the grade 1, but I think it was clearly a stronger field, as you say.
Yeah, one other horse I want to mention, just because I think this might be a race where you could spread a little bit, since I'm not in love with some of the shorter prices. One other horse I want to mention is the number 4 Edgemont Road. Some of those races that he was competing in at Tampa over the winter have actually turned out to be pretty strong, with Zendin being the winner of one. Super Stonehenge came back to be second in the Carter. And prior to that, when he was racing in a different barn, he had run some nice speed figures going back to 2020. Actually nosed out the horse that we were just talking about, Tough Love, in a race at Keeneland, and run some bigger speed figures prior to that. He's another horse who has good tactical speed, so he figures to get the right trip in here, and he's going to be a price, so I would use him as well. This is a race where I would be primarily focusing on Empire of Gold, but I would want to use backups like Tough Love and Edgemont Road. let's close things out by moving on to the 11th race, the final race of the day at Churchill, and the last race of this pick 5 sequence. It is the Douglas Park Overnight, a stakes going a mile in the 16th on the turf for the older horses. And we've got a horse from the Brad Cox stable who is probably going to be favored in here, Set Piece. He was pretty impressive winning a stakes last time at Churchill Downs on Derby week. When this horse decides to show up, he's pretty good. The problem is, we don't always see his best effort.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to do with Set Piece. I mean, I'm certainly going to use him, but at 2-1, and he may very well be lower than that, he's kind of the horse that he's really hard to get excited about because, like you said, sometimes he just doesn't show up. He's often at the mercy of the pace and having to get a good trip. And it's still his best races have come on synthetic. He got a nice 120 speed figure last time, but his best races have come over that turfway surface where he's able to just, it seems like he loves it there. So yeah, I'm going to use him, but I don't love him. But that said, this is a really tough race. I mean, it's a field of 9. You have horses coming in, a couple of them off long layoffs. You got a couple recent trainer changes, and just a lot of horses that have shown they're capable of running that same 120 type speed figure. I'm definitely going to spread in a race like this. If I have to make a top pick, I think it would probably be Ramsey's Solution. He's a horse who's coming in for Wesley Ward. I'm assuming he's going to run, which is always dangerous with Wesley because he does seem to scratch out of these spots a lot. But he's a horse who's ran fine. He's ran figures just as good as the winner. We know Wesley Ward can bring him back off a layoff. And compared to some of the other layoff horses in here, Parlor, who's run some big figures, he ran really poorly off a similar layoff the last time he tried it back in 2019. Another Mystery's another talented horse coming off a layoff, but his trainer, Chris Block, I think it was, doesn't really bring him out firing. So of those, I do like Ramsey's Solution. Set Piece, there's not really much more to add about him. I think he'll run his race. It's just a matter of can he get through? Is he going to get pace? The one other horse I thought was interesting that I was tempted to make my top pick, and maybe I'll use him on my ticket, is Pioneer Spirit. He's a claim back by Diodoro. He hasn't been on turf in a while, but he is a horse who showed some success. And Diodoro, whenever a trainer like Robertino Diodoro reaches back in and takes a horse they used to have before, particularly this one, he had claimed him once for $150,000 and did well with him. He claimed him for only $62.5 here, and he could very well have a pace advantage in here. So I think he's a horse that's worth using as well.
Yeah, this race is not predicted to have any kind of, it doesn't show any characterization on the pace projector. I mean, for a turf race that's a route, I saw a decent amount of pace in here. I mean, you've got Pioneer Spirit, Ramsey Solution has speed, but the horse on the outside, the number 9, Gray's Fable, seems like one that has to be sent to the front. I mean, he's done his best running on the lead, so I would imagine that James Graham will be aggressive with him and try to get him to the front end. And I mean, that probably compromises Pioneer Spirit more than it does Ramsey Solution, since Ramsey Solution has shown the ability to stalk in the past. I guess my one problem with Ramsey Solution is that his biggest speed figure was earned at Kentucky Downs last year on that week where seemed like every race was a track record and some horses were really loving that hard surface, others weren't. He's run fine in his surrounding races and he has run well over this Churchill Downs surface before. I don't know. I thought Ramsey Solution was a horse coming in with big figures that was getting a bit of a class test here. I kind of wanted to go in a different direction. We have very similar feelings about the favorite Set Piece. He was impressive last time winning that stakes at Churchill. Don't totally trust him. Think he's a horse that you do have to use, but this is a race that, kind of like you, I viewed more as a spread race than one where I really wanted to hone in on a single horse. As for the horse that set the pace in the race that Set Piece comes out of, Gray's Fable, the one that I mentioned was probably going to be on the lead. I mean, he might just really be in great form right now as a 6-year-old. He ran very well 2 back at Gulfstream to win that Appleton, perhaps over a course that's a little more speed favoring than Churchill Downs is, but it just seems like he might have turned a corner right now for Roger Atfield. So he's one that I would use, but the horse that I ended up putting on top is the horse coming off the layoff, the number 3 Parlor. To me, it just felt like a long campaign got the better of him at the end of last year when he put in that poor effort as the favorite at Churchill in November. That was one of those late season turf courses at Churchill that some horses don't appreciate. Also, if you go back and look at the chart of that race, it was just a merry-go-round affair. Nobody did any closing. Frostmore and Wire the field on the front end. The other two, who were second and third, ran around the entire racetrack in those positions. Nobody could make up any ground. So I'm not going to hold that against Parlor. And prior to that, he was in a really good form. I mean, he did not run badly at all in the Shadwell Turf Mile 2 back, getting a huge speed figure, finishing behind Ivar and Raging Bull, and going a couple starts prior to that, he had nearly won the Grade 1 Maker's Mark over War of Will. Not the toughest Grade 1 that we've seen, but, I mean, Mike Maker had gotten this horse to really fulfill his potential last year, and obviously things went awry towards the end of 2020, but now he's coming back off a layoff. I know Mike Maker doesn't have the best layoff stats, but they're decent enough. And I just think if this horse can get back to his prior efforts and get the kind of stalking trip that the pace projector is predicting, he's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, as you were talking, I kind of scrolled through the PPs and I had looked at his layoff where he came back and didn't run. But somehow I missed it, and I actually was looking for it. It happens when you get old. He was claimed in the interim, so scratch what I said there. I mean, I was going to use Parlor anyway, but I'm going to give it an upgrade over what I talked about because my old eyes missed that he was not in the Maker barn the last time he came off this kind of layoff. I will say before we wrap it up, the one horse I'm totally against in here is the second choice on the morning line, Logical Myth. He was a horse who had been running really good at the fairgrounds, but he was just getting perfect trips. I know neither of us particularly liked him, and I think he's kind of been exposed since then. He didn't run well his last two times out, and I think we're going to see similar here. I'm not sure he's really going to be the second choice in here, but if he is, I want no parts of him.
Yeah, I echo those statements. And the other horse that's listed at a relatively short price on the line that I don't want is the number 2, Another Mystery. He's a horse who had run some of the best races of his career when he had a stint in the Michael McCarthy barn last year. But that aside, while I don't love that he's coming out of a sharp barn like Michael McCarthy, he's also a horse that's done his best running over much longer distances. He's really more of a 1 3/8 to 1.5 mile specialist. And this feels like it's just a prep for something longer down the line. So I don't know if he's actually going to be the same price as Parlor in this race, but he's not one that I wanted any part of either. Well, that's the entire pick 5 sequence to end the day at Churchill Downs. It's one where I think you can lean on a few horses at different points. Obviously, we talked about Envoûtante being one that you can lean on pretty heavily or potentially single in the first leg, or maybe you just want to skip that race and turn it into a late pick 4 sequence. For me, I would lean on Obesos in that Matt Winn. I think he is kind of a standout from a class standpoint, and maybe I'll use some backups. And the others, to me, are more spread races, but particularly the last race and actually the last two, the Aristides and that turf race to end the day. I think those are ones where you can spread out a little bit, maybe catch a price.
Yeah, you're going to need to catch a price because the two most likely winners are going to get bet pretty heavily, as you mentioned. But, it's one where you got to be smart putting the ticket together. You don't want to put a ticket together and realize you have combinations where you have 4 or 5 favorites in there because you're going to wind up spending too much. So use that ABC system judiciously. I think that's something you can use in Formulator. I've kind of written my own thing, so I don't use the Formulator version, but it's out there for people who do, and I think it helps with ticket construction.
Yeah, when you've got a sequence like this and it looks like it could be a little chalky, you have to find the chalks that you want to throw out, even from a pick 5 standpoint. I mean, for me, those horses would be like Tap It to Win in the Aristides or Folsom in the Matt Winn, horses that I think are going to take quite a bit of money that if they win, I just am not going to win the wager that I put together because you have to, as you said, you have to be judicious where you want to use these short prices. Try not to have all short prices as the ones you're leaning on in these sequences, especially if you're spreading a little bit in later races. So that's how I'm going to try to narrow it down as we get through to the later portions of this pick 5 sequence.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. If you're leaning on favorites in a couple of the races like Obesos and Envoûtante, there's no point using short prices in the other horses because you're going to wind up cashing the thing and losing money anyway.
Well, that's our pick 5 wisdom for you, and hopefully we gave out some good picks on this forecast, and we'll recap everything when we come back to do the TimeformUS Pacecast next week, of course. We'll be recording that on Tuesday, the same day that they're actually drawing the Belmont Stakes card, so a lot to look forward to in the horse racing world as we look ahead to next week. Craig and I will be doing our podcast next week, and I imagine we'll be doing some handicapping of the Belmont. We'll talk about exactly when we do that, whether it be on the Pacecast or the forecast later in the week, so plenty to look forward to next week. Remember, you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and make sure to stay tuned for that TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday.